I think that it is on now. Yes, great.
Yes, it works.
Okay,
yes.
That's great. And what I wanted to tell you is that since we are going to have a dedicated session on questions and answers, if you would like to keep notes while the speakers presented presentations, that would be great. And also if you want to use the chat to address some questions, that is also great because we will be checking it regularly, and we can have all of our questions at the end of the session. So thank you very much. And with that, I will start with the first presentation. Okay. Just let me share my screen first. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
That's great.
Not in presentation. Yes. Now it's in presentation mode.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so our first presentation, Margarita and Christos, if we can have your eyes on the people that are joining. Welcome, Maya.
Yes.
So let's begin. Our first presentation is focusing on presenting the steps to create a monitoring and evaluation framework to assess the impact of citizen science hubs. This monitoring and evaluation framework has been created in the context of Incentive. Incentive is a Horizon 2020 project, which is running, but it's being run by 9 partners and 8 countries, with University of Twente being the coordinator. And what Incentive aims to do is to promote responsible research and innovation through citizen science in order for a more inclusive, participatory, and sustainable and democratic way of conducting scientific research and including our society in the processes of research. In order to do that, Incentive has created 4 citizen science hubs in 4 countries in Europe, in Greece, Spain, the Netherlands, and Lithuania. And the citizen science hubs aim to bring together the local society in order to find solutions to scientific research. Now, to start, I would like to provide some key definitions of 3 specific terms. So regarding monitoring, assessment, and evaluation. Now, monitoring is a process that involves tracking the citizen science hub's metrics and progress and activities, and to collect data and other information. This is a process that will actually fit into assessment and the evaluation process. Assessment is a process to review the data that we have collected with the purpose of improving the current citizen science hub's performance, and it is an ongoing process. On the other hand, evaluation is a process to review the data that we have collected with the purpose of determining the success and the impact of the citizen science hubs. And in essence, evaluation provides us with closure on a period. Now, let's begin with the steps to create a monitoring and evaluation framework. The first step is to identify our citizen science hub's objectives. So, usually, the purpose of a monitoring and evaluation framework is to assess the progress towards key citizen science hubs objectives. So we will need to pick 2 or 3 key objectives, and of course, also have some sub-objectives in these key objectives that will help us later see what the indicators we will need will be. Before we pick our objectives, it is important to have a holistic understanding of the citizen science hubs and the university's current situation and vision. And a good way to do that is to also consult our internal and external stakeholders. For example, by organizing a co-creation workshop or or getting in contact with them. An example could be, and these examples are, of course, deriving from our monitoring and evaluation framework that has been created for the incentive project. So, for example, our first objective is grounding responsible research and innovation in society. And to make it even more specific, its first sub-objective is about promoting good practices in citizen science, and the second is about cultivating a more scientifically literate society. So now that we have established our key objectives, the second step would be to pick some monitoring methods, such as, for example, asking for feedback after events, collecting data from platforms, or interviewing our stakeholders. So some tips about picking monitoring methods is to find or plan activities that you can actually collect data. Since the Citizen Science Hub is, of course, going to be implementing some activities, for example, having supporting citizen science projects, or deploying workshops, or making events to raise awareness about its activities. These are really nice instances that you could use to collect data. Also, depending on your objectives, you will need to decide who could best provide this data. So so see who the data subjects would be. For example, through a workshop, it would be the participants of the workshop. And third, based on what we have discussed until now, it is important to configure the specific data collection methods. So to give an example, let's see the first method that we have created. It would be the project, the activity that would be the one offering us the opportunity to collect data would be a citizen science project that is supported and works in collaboration with Citizen Science Hub. And of course, the data subjects would be the project participants, or also it would be the project leader. And this could, the tool that could be used could be semi-structured interviews. And the important thing is that the citizen science project has fulfilled its cycle and completed its research, so that by the end of the project would be a good period for these interviews to take place, since the participants will have a holistic overview of what has happened and what their experience has been. And of course, the collector here could be a citizen science project leader. And all of these characteristics and tools and the timing, the data subject, all of these actually construct our first method in this case. So to continue with step 3, step 3 is to create our indicators. So we will need to create some indicators per objective or sub-objective, as we said before, in order to measure our progress towards that objective that we have set at the beginning of creating our monitoring and evaluation framework. So some tips are that, of course, it is better to use percentages than absolute values, and to mention both the numerator and the denominator for our convenience and to know what we are actually measuring. And it is also important to be precise, because while you are designing the monitoring and evaluation framework, there will be it is important to have in mind the end game that is to actually measure the things that you have set for, and to be precise is important for you to remember what you have created. And an example could be for, measuring the number of stakeholders believing that involving citizens in research and innovation activities must be promoted further, divided by the total number of stakeholders that have been surveyed. Also, it is very helpful to assign an identifier to each indicator, because it will be much easier for you to actually find them inside the tools that you will use, and to it will help you with assessing everything and accumulating your data. And it is also important to match each indicator to a monitoring method, and we will see specifically why in the next step that we will see. Now, the indicators that you will choose will probably fall into the following categories. So we have process indicators, which measure the quantity and quality of any actions taken and processes implemented. We have outcome indicators, which measure the outcomes achieved, and perception indicators, which help us measure the changes in perception and values of the engaged stakeholders. And finally, some pro tips. If the outcomes cannot be quantified or it is hard to measure, you can always ask for people's perceptions and see what they think about something that it is important for you. Second, if you're interested in change from period to period, but you can only measure it once, then you can just do that. If you don't have the opportunity to actually perform the collection twice. So an example could be to find out the number of stakeholders who reported that their past beliefs on a topic under discussion were different to their current beliefs, and divide this by the total number of stakeholders surveyed. Now, I won't go into detail on all those indicators, but here are some examples of the indicators that we have picked for the monitoring and evaluation framework of incentive, which have been more than 100 and have been divided in many different collection methods. Now, step 4 would be to create the materials. So the materials could be questionnaires, interview templates, report templates, and of course, probably you're going to need a database to accumulate all this data, and which will help you have an overview of all the information that you have gathered, and especially with quantitative data, it will help you have the absolute numbers and percentages that you will need to do the final assessment and evaluation. Now, since we have already followed all these steps until step 4, and we have created our indicators, this is and we have picked the methods and everything. Now, this is the step to actually create all of the questionnaires that we will need. So since we have already created the indicators, we can just rephrase them in order for them to sound like questions, and of course, make sure that they are simple and easy to understand. And of course, keep in mind that you could also add some open-ended questions in order to receive also qualitative input, because sometimes it can be beneficial and add supportively to the qualitative data that you have accumulated. Also, at this stage, while creating the materials, you will probably see whether the size of the questionnaires is too long, and you might need to reconsider it and potentially remove some of the less important indicators and questions. And at this stage, it is, of course, important to consult with the people that are going to be the data collectors and to ensure their commitment. And also to make sure that this framework that you have been creating is meaningful and easy to implement for the purpose that you have created it. Finally, it is important to keep in mind the GDPR provisions. For example, you can create templates of informed consent, data subject request form, and a privacy policy so that you are prepared to hand it out with the questionnaires or the forms that you will create to the participants of your monitoring, and be sure to have their consent on collecting their data. So now, for incentive, for the purposes of monitoring and evaluating the impact of the citizen science hubs, what we have what we have created this far is activity reports, feedback questionnaires for our events, interview templates in order to collect our stakeholders' views, and citizen science hubs reports in order for the people that are actually implementing all the activities to be able to report on them. And of course, as I said before, for us it was important to also create a reporting database which will allow for comparative analysis and exchange of ideas among us. And of course, on this reporting database, it's only aggregated and anonymized data that is being uploaded. And now we can move forward to step 5, which is about picking assessment and evaluation techniques. Now, in order to pick our evaluation techniques, it is important to think which performance or outcome will be good and which will be bad, and to also see what our targets are. For example, would 70% be enough for some of our indicators? And with that in mind, a first technique to evaluate our results is to compare the results with the targets that we have set at the beginning of this procedure with the help of the Citizen Science Hubs administration or other internal stakeholders of the university in which the Citizen Science Hub is operating. So this technique helps us to avoid the one-size-fits-all assessment, and also it can account for the specificities, the baseline situation, and the available resources of our Citizen Science Hub, and it is of course taking into account the hub's vision. Also, of course, keep in mind that our targets need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. A second technique would be to validate our results by the public. For example, by deploying interviews with stakeholders. Through this technique, the results are presented to the stakeholders, and then they are asked to evaluate them based on their experience and their expectations. And a third technique is to compare the outcomes to worldwide or European trends or other citizen science hubs. And of course, this will help us investigate whether our results are superior, inferior, or aligned with the results commonly achieved worldwide. Now, why is evaluation important? First of all, it helps us improve the Citizen Science Hub's activities by identifying the strong and weak parts of our approach and what interferes with our success, what the prohibiting factors are. And as a result, it can help us improve the Citizen Science Hub planning. And finally, collecting evidence of what we have done and on what the impact of the Citizen Science Hub's activities are, and presenting it to the stakeholders can trigger their interest to the Citizen Science Hub's actions and further ground responsible research and innovation through Citizen Science Hubs in our university. Finally, our last step is to verify and implement the monitoring and evaluation framework that we have created. So now, it is important to ensure that our data collectors understand and agree with the monitoring and evaluation, and of course the duties that they will have to undertake, because someone will have to be the responsible person or persons in the Citizen Science Hub who will actually run this and implement it. And in order to make sure that this happens, it is important to also provide training on implementing the monitoring and evaluation activities. For example, organizing a capacity building workshop or creating a guidebook, so that people are on the same page and they know where to go for consultation, and of course be open to consult them whenever they need to. Finally, a really nice touch would also be to set up a data reflection and fine-tuning meetings that are regular and where preliminary findings can be presented to the people that are involved in the collection, allowing us to discuss, exchange ideas, and see if we need to do any improvements to the current approach. So to sum things up, our first step is to identify the hub's objectives. The second step is to pick monitoring methods. The third is to create the indicators. The fourth is to create the materials that we will need, and then to pick assessment and evaluation techniques, and finally start verify it and start implementing the monitoring and evaluation framework. So with this, I can resume this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully it wasn't too long. And we can proceed with our next presentation, which will be by Teresa. I will stop sharing my screen now. Just a moment. And Teresa, if you want to share your screen.
Thank you, Ellie. Thanks for this very nice presentation and this step-by-step introduction into how to set up this evaluation framework and indicators and instruments. I will try to share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Just tell me if that works.
Yes, it's working.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. So I'm Teresa Schäfer. I'm presenting the sister project of Incentive, which is called Time for Citizen Science. And my presentation will be again on evaluation and impact assessment. This time, not only on a citizen science contact point, but in general, more generally, on institutional changes within research performing organizations that support citizen science. And I will start with a very short introduction into the Time for Citizen Science project. For those who have not met the project before, we are a European project with 11 partners from 9 different countries. And the main objective of this project is that we look into research performing organizations like universities And we try to trigger institutional changes to support citizen science. So we see that there are many universities where citizen science is not as well established as we think it would be nice. So we want to investigate what can we do from an institutional side to support citizen science in these research performing organizations. And to do so, we have defined intervention areas. These are areas where we think that an institution can set specific activities to trigger and support citizen science. So these are the 4 intervention areas: research, education, support resources, and the policy level. And for each of these intervention areas at the beginning of the project, we started to define some grounding actions. So these are the specific actions that we think that could be done within an organization to support citizen science. To give you an example, in the intervention area research, of course, a quite evident grounding action would be to develop research projects using the citizen science methodology, or expand running projects to use citizen science methodology. In the education and awareness area, we think about setting up training programs on citizen science, for instance, or organize debates and public events to promote citizen science. On the level of support resources and infrastructures, we think that it would make a lot of sense to identify and implement an institutional contact point for citizen science that supports citizen science projects, or to develop protocols for the implementation of citizen science. And on the policy and assessment level, we would have all this work on strategic papers or vision statements that involve citizen science, and to develop new institutional norms and regulations that also consider citizen science. So these are the intervention areas that we defined at the beginning of the project. And this is where you can see how this works. So we have in the project, we have 11 partners, and 3 partners, research performing organizations where citizen science is already well established and supported. So there's a good tradition of citizen science projects and citizen science trainings and all this institutional support for citizen science. But then we have 4 research performing organizations where citizen science is really not supported yet, where you can hardly find any citizen science activities. And at the beginning, we started to consolidate the different knowledge that we have, also especially from those who already have these infrastructures established. And then we went into a co-design process with these 4 organizations where we really want to trigger citizen science support. And we selected some of the grounding actions and set a time plan to implement these grounding actions and to support the institutional changes. And in this whole process, of course, knowledge sharing and learning from each other, also learning from the different implementation processes in the 4 different universities was very important. Training was also a key activity. And of course, evaluating the whole process and also the impact of the process. So to see what is really changing within the organizations by the activities that are done. And can we see that there's now more support for citizen science in the organizations? So this area 4, this is where I would go into more detail now. Just to sum up, so we had these 4 intervention areas. We had these front runners, the organizations who are quite far in supporting citizen science, who also helped to define the intervention areas. We had these grounding actions, and we defined roadmaps for the implementing organizations, where we tried to then investigate these institutional changes. So, and now we come to the evaluation. And the first things that I want to start off, and Ellie was talking a lot about it before, are these indicators. So we had quite clear objectives given by the project as such. We want to trigger citizen science, the uptake of citizen science within these research performing organizations. But now we would need to have the indicators, and we define the indicators along these intervention areas. So we said, okay, for each of these intervention area, we would have some indicators for institutional change. And some of them are quite clear and concrete. And to give you an example, so are there any citizen science training programs already installed in the organization? Is there any citizen science in teaching programs of PhD students, for instance? Are there any formal or informal education activities that we can consider? Are there any informal locations to meet researchers who are involved in citizen science? Or are there any citizen science champions already? So people who have already been involved in citizen science and can share their knowledge and their experiences with others. And is there any institutional support for these citizen science champions? So this would be examples for these indicators in this first area. If we look into support structures, we can, for instance, see, is there funding for a citizen science coordinator? Are there tools to be used for citizen science projects? In the policy and assessment area, of course, we can see, are there any evaluation criteria of the researchers' evaluation that consider citizen science? Are there any mission statements that mention citizen science and refer to that approach? Are there any regulations that we can find in the organizations? And then in the research area, of course, we can see and look if there are any citizen science projects, how many researchers are involved in these projects, are there any networks already created, links to other organizations, and so on. So these are the indicators that we defined on the institutional level. But we also said if you want to trigger changes within organizations, we cannot only look at this rather top-down level, so an institutional level, we also have to look at the individual level, the level of researchers and administrative stuff, so for instance, and see what kind of changes can be triggered there with regard, for instance, to knowledge on citizen science, the motivation to be involved, which is a big issue, the interest in that, or the self-efficacy, the feeling, the perceived feeling of being capable of being involved in a citizen science project. So these are indicators on an individual level that we defined. And then after having defined this overarching set of indicators, we created logic models for each implementer. A logic model, I don't know if you have come across this, I guess all the people who are involved in the incentive project are. This is a model that helps us to define the expected outputs and outcomes of a specific activity. And we went to each of the implementer organizations, and as I told you before, the implementers have co-designed their roadmaps. They have selected specific grounding actions that they want to implement in their organizations. And we have taken these specific grounding actions and looked into what are the planned activities, who are the engaged actors, what is the very specific output that we can measure, what is the outcome? The outcome is the effect of the output. So the output would be very specifically numbers of training content delivered as an example, and the outcome then would be the increased knowledge on citizens on citizen science, for instance. Then we have started to come up with some concrete indicators to measure this output, but also the outcome. And we used this logic model and we extended it as a tool to plan our evaluation activities. So we always put some potential means of data gathering for these indicators. And also, and I just put this query here to not show any names, but also to collect already names and people who can then be involved in the evaluation activities. So this is a logic model that we set up for all the implementer organizations to plan our activities. And it's a living document. That means that we fill it in on a yearly basis to update it. And for instance, so for this example, this is the planned action is to raise internal awareness and train the researchers on citizen science. And there we have defined some specific activities like setting up citizen science training programs. And then we have defined the output, which would be, for instance, the course content that is created and the course delivered, and so on. And the outcome would be an increased knowledge and increased, of course, interest also to be involved in citizen science. And then we have some indicators like the number of participants in the training program, hours of content delivered, number of tutors engaged, and so on. But also then some more feedback that we get, like the perceived usefulness, increased knowledge, self-reported increased interest in citizen science, and uptake of the knowledge in practical terms, and so on. So, and then this is something that is then updated. So here we would update after 1 year and say, okay, we had so and so many participants involved, and so on, to see how this is evolving with the time of the project. So this is the first thing that we use to plan our activities. And the second thing, of course, is also to have a time plan and to have this collection of data instruments. So in the logic model, you saw that we have put some potential data collection instruments, and here then we had this time plan where we also put this across the runtime of the project. And you can see, for instance, for the institutional change, one of our key evaluation methods was this stock-taking exercise. And that's what we actually started with. We started with an initial stock-taking of institutional changes within the organizations, even before we started to implement anything, so that we would have a baseline to compare with. And to see in how far are institutional changes then evolving with the runtime of the project. So this stock-taking exercise would then be repeated, and was repeated in year 2 and year 3. We are already in year 3, so we are in the last year of the project. So we're really in the middle of evaluating all these things. So this is, for instance, to collect institutional changes. To collect individual changes, of course, there are this, as I mentioned before, also we work with questionnaires, for instance, with training participants. So if we set up training modules for, let's say, researchers, you can, of course, do a pre-post evaluation on knowledge and interest and motivation and self-efficacy. But we can then also do a practical application questionnaire 4 to 6 months after the training and see in how far has the new knowledge on citizen science as in general and the citizen science methodologies being really then practically used in the research projects. And an important instrument for us is also these expert interviews and semi-structured interviews, where we involve different people from the implement organizations, like the researchers, but also management, the people who really support this implementation of the activities in interviews to learn from their experiences. And then we want to also get some feedback on the implementation process. And here we have set up internal meetings, very regular internal meetings, where the team meets and exchanges experiences on what works when we try to implement the grounding actions in the universities, and what does not work, and what are the potential solutions to come across the barriers, and what is the effect of all that. To show you that, in a bit more in detail. So this, I mentioned the stock taking, which is really an important part of our evaluation, where we started at the beginning and where we wanted to know where does the institution depart regarding institutional changes. And we prepared a template that defines for the different 4 intervention areas some key indicators that are looked at the beginning and then revisited on a yearly basis. And here we can see where is the institution already advancing in which of the intervention areas, but there are also areas where still there's potential for improvement. And I just put a screenshot here of a small part of this template where you can see, for instance, in the education and awareness intervention area, we had some questions on capacity building, means on training. So some questions like, how high do you think is the awareness for citizen science among your researchers? How big is the knowledge on citizen science methodologies? And does your organization offer already training and workshops on citizen science? And could you describe that? And so on. So this is a template where the implementers go through, and they can see very often they realize that many of these rounding actions or many of these areas are still empty, so there is no training, there are no projects yet related to citizen science, but there we might also detect some first things where we can build on in the project. I was too fast here, sorry. So just to show you what is the outcome of this stock taking, this initial stock taking. So this is an example for 2 universities we worked with. This is University of San Raffaele in Italy. And there we have the Center for Genomic Regulation in Barcelona. And you can see that they started off with slightly different, let's say, positions. For instance, in University San Raffaele, there was no citizen science training and activities in teaching yet. There was but some activities with expert patients, but they did not consider themselves citizen science. There were no specific resources dedicated to citizen science. There was open science and science communication mentioned in the strategy papers, also in evaluation criteria, but no citizen science. And there were no citizen science projects, no engagement of researchers in citizen science projects, but these expert patient projects, citizen science-like activities. And in general, the knowledge on citizen science was very low. Also, to differentiate between what is citizen science, what is participatory research, what is all these different things, where's the difference, and also the motivation to get involved in these activities was still quite low. In CRG, we could see that also there were no specific trainings on citizen science organized by the institution, but there have been 2 projects already related to citizen science, and these have been quite successful projects. So there have been some informal meetings with these researchers involved in these successful projects. There was already a citizen science facilitator who had no sustainable funding, but at least there was already one in place who supported these 2 citizen science projects. So you can see that's how we defined different starting points, and then we updated that on a yearly level. Here's an example of how we evaluated individual changes. I put some indicators here that we wanted to collect via this questionnaires, for instance, where formative feedback on the trainings that we developed within the project, the immediate benefits like knowledge, confidence, interest, and the long-term benefits like taking up this in the practical research. And this is just an example of an evaluation instrument that we used on-site in the trainings, just to give you an example where we defined some key objectives of the training, and people in the room could give us feedback on in how far we reached the different objectives, and we used this then to discuss more qualitatively about the usefulness of the training. I mentioned also the expert interviews, and I give you some example questions here that we do with research support staff, with management, with students, where we ask in how far they have been involved in the citizen science, time for citizen science activities. They provide us with formative feedback on the activities, but also with more practical feedback on how far this affected their work. If the interviewees could observe any change challenges within the organizations, intended and of course also unintended ones. Also questions for the future, what would it further need to support citizen science? So these are questions, example questions of these expert interviews. And then for the process evaluation, we had these implemented journey reviews, these meetings that take place every 3 months, where we send out a template before these meetings, where we really specifically reflect upon the implementation process, because as one of the outcomes of the project, we want to really give recommendations to other universities on the most important steps they could take, or most effective steps that they could take to implement citizen science within their organization. And to do so, we have to learn from the different contexts and see what are the outcomes of the different activities that are taken, what are experienced challenges, what are unintended consequences. So these are things that the implement organizations fill in before we meet, and then we meet together, the implementers and also the ones who are the front runners, the ones who are more experienced in citizen science. And we discuss these challenges and share our experiences and try to support the implementers also in advancing with their process. And I thought it might also be interesting to see what are first lessons learned from this implementation process, because it's always so interesting to see what are, I think, the challenges for universities who are not involved in citizen science yet. And what we really learned, and this was also quite a surprise for us, that citizen science is perceived as, by many researchers, as being something that is triggered from top to down. So the European Commission is pushing for citizen science. Also, university management thinks that citizen science is useful because there's access to new funding, and it's also interesting because it has a societal impact. But for the researchers as such, it's an on-top activity to extremely in an environment where researchers are already working extremely competitive. They have to do their publications, they have to acquire new funding and so on, and then they have to do citizen science on top, which means that they would need more skills and knowledge for this involvement of the general public that many researchers do not have. And for many of them, also, it's difficult to differentiate between what is science communication, what is participatory research, and where is citizen science located and all that. And it requires really for a better understanding of the value that citizen science brings for research and role models and good practice in the specific research area. So we have found out that, of course, important grounding actions, for instance, is the citizen science facilitator or contact point that supports other researchers and who are the change managers within their organizations. We learned that very often inspiring sessions, that means very short sessions where successful citizen science projects are presented, where researchers who have experience in that talk more informally to others are important before you even start with a more extended training. We saw that this connection to citizen science networks and communities is really important to learn from each other. If you're not well linked to other actors, then it's difficult to understand from others what is the benefit of citizen science. And also being involved in first projects where you can learn from that and have also a good storytelling, have good stories to tell to others why this is important, of course, helps. And of course, the context also, the institutional context strongly influences if change can happen within your institutions. So we, of course, realized that the early involvement of the management is key in all these issues. But it also requires an open culture of communication. So if there are no, for instance, communication channels established within an organization, it's really difficult to trigger change. There's, of course, always the issue of funding. It requires funding to to collect his first experiences with citizen science and overcome these prejudices that you would have, like citizen science doesn't generate any valuable data, or all the things that you would find in these organizations. And it also, of course, there are always these formal procedures to consider when establishing new structures, new citizen science contact points, and so on. So we see that the whole implementation process, of course, triggers institutional changes on various levels, also on the level of the individuals who are involved, the researchers and the support staff. We will try to sum up all these lessons learned and very concrete recommendations on how to support citizen science in universities and research performing organizations at the end of the project. And yeah, this was my presentation. And I will, thanks for listening. I will try to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting to also see some of the results of your method and many parallel things happening between our projects, I must say. And I think we can move on with our third presentation with our third presenter, Stephen Parkinson from MICS. Thank you very much. We can see your screen.
Perfect. And thank you both for those presentations to begin with. I found it very interesting myself, particularly because it's in an area slightly different from the work that we undertook in MICS. So this will be a slight change in direction, because MICS was really designed as an impact assessment tool for projects rather than organizations or citizen science hubs. But I can reflect slightly on the connection at the end of my presentation. But first, for those of you who haven't come across MICS before, I'll just give an overview of the platform. So the work I'm presenting today came out of a Horizon 2020 project, which finished last summer. But the output of that project, the legacy of that project, is a platform and website which provides a tool for citizen science projects to measure their impact. And that platform is still very much alive and being updated and looked after. So the platform, I'll give you now some screenshots. Unfortunately, I don't have time to give a full sort of live demonstration of the platform, but some screenshots just to give you an idea of what the platform aims to achieve. You can sign up to the platform and create a project there, and in your project space you are then able to go through a journey to kind of assess your project's impact in a number of areas. So we have these 5 domains: so society, environment, science and technology, economy and governance. And within each of those kind of areas, you follow a path, and along these paths you have these nodes, and each node is a question. So for example here, what type of citizen science is the project according to the following categories? And every question has sort of predefined answer options. So it's just a matter of kind of reading the answers and clicking those that are relevant to you. And most questions also have some kind of help or information text. So for example, in this case, there's this text that says these categories come from a paper by Jennifer Shirk et al. And then there's a link to the paper. So in a lot of these cases, it's kind of also pointing you in the direction of new resources or information. So that means there are a lot of links, but it's there to kind of for projects to pick and choose what's interesting to them to find out more about, but to kind of signpost potentially interesting things for them to look at in the future. And as they go through this process, there's also an impact report that is produced. which has a number of sections, like a very basic project descriptive information, and then a set of rule-based scores, a set of recommendations based on those rule-based scores, and then finally a set of machine learning scores. And I'll go through in a bit more detail about each of those later, but just to give you that sort of overarching thing that you kind of go through this process of answering questions and at the end come out with this report. And so the aim of the platform overall is firstly just like a space to help projects think about impact, particularly for projects that haven't really spent a lot of time considering their impact before. And in that sense, we also kind of have found that the tool can be very helpful when people are first designing projects as well. That they basically answer the questions imagining the impact of their project in a year's time as they're designing it, and in doing so they kind of start to consider perhaps some areas of impact that they haven't thought about before, which they can then take into account as they're designing the project as well. But in all of these questions and across all these domains, we tend to find that there's at least something that sparks a new idea in people as they go through the questions. As I was saying, also there are these resources and templates which are linked throughout the questions, but also on our companion website, which is about.mix.tools, where we share basically all of the kind of background research that went into the platform as well. In about.mix.tools, there's also some guidance on impact data collection. So in addition to the tool, the platform as we present it is not a kind of complete sort of impact assessment in the sense that like it helps to sort of think comprehensively about all the sorts of areas of impact that a project might have. But then if you want to really specifically measure particular metrics for your project, you kind of it's a complement to other sort of impact assessment approaches, because it's all the questions are kind of in this standardized format with pre-selected answers. It gives a sort of a strength in certain aspects, but if you want really bespoke stuff, then you have to follow other impact assessment methods as well. The output again is this impact orientated project description, and with this element of a quantified assessment as well. This slide just gives some background on how we developed the platform over the length of the project, but the point of this is really to emphasize that this came from firstly an in-depth literature review of current methods of impact assessment in citizen science, and then from that were extracted basically a set of indicators for citizen science projects, which were put into this initial framework. But that framework was then kind of tested extensively through a series of interviews and workshops with citizen science coordinators, which is how we arrived at these questions. So all the questions have been sort of gone through by many projects before, and that's helped us to kind of tweak the wording to create the help and information text where things aren't clear, and also to kind of change the answer options so that hopefully for every question now there's an answer option which is relevant for every project. But this is also something that we consider the work never finished. So even now we have the capacity to change questions, to change answers, and we're always very happy and open for people as they use the platform, if they have suggestions, to kind of get in contact with us and help us to improve this, because particularly as citizen science as a field kind of continues to grow and more people kind of get involved with it, I'm sure that the situation of citizen science will develop in such a way that there will be things that aren't covered in these questions now. So yeah, as I was saying, the outcome of that literature review was this set of questions. There are now over 200 of these questions split across these 5 domains. But to give an example as well of the sort of things that are covered within it, 45 of those questions are related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's another kind of interesting aspect that in answering the questions, you also then kind of, in some ways, get also a mapping on how the project relates to the SDGs. And similarly, like 42 of the questions are derived in some way from the exit characteristics of citizen science. So again, by answering the questions, the project is in some ways kind of like mapped against those characteristics of citizen science. There are many different sources. I just sort of highlighted these two as things that are often kind of selected as things of interest for citizen science projects. But yeah, the list of sources for all of the questions would be far too long to go through now. To talk briefly about the impact report, which I mentioned earlier, there are these three main sections: the rule-based scores, the recommendations, and the machine learning scores. So for the rule-based scores, we take a small set of the questions that we ask, which are all related to a specific topic, and we give a weight to each of the answer options for those questions, and then we just sum the weights for the answer options that have been selected by the project. And so it gives like a quantitative assessment of a kind of specific aspect of impact, and but in a very kind of controlled and contained way with this small number of questions. So for example, for this policy indicator here, there are only 4 questions that are selected, because even if there are other questions which are kind of maybe tangentially related to policy in the journey, these are the ones which are kind of super explicitly policy related, and so kind of give this combination for this overall policy score. Based on each of those scores, there's then a corresponding recommendation as well, and each recommendation kind of appears at different sort of score thresholds. And again, this is another opportunity to kind of be sharing links and resources and pointing in particular directions. So for example, this policy recommendation is based on a low policy score where people have basically answered all of the previous policy questions, so they're not doing anything related to policy. And so the recommendations are mostly based around sort of papers describing policy impacts of citizen science, and also a report with lots of example projects and their policy impacts. So kind of pointing projects in that direction. But you will see also in the wording of the question, the recommendation, that the recommendations, we had to be very careful to kind of word them softly in a certain extent, because as was touched on in the other presentations, not every area of impact is going to be a priority for every project. So it would be perfectly justifiable for a project to be saying, well, policy isn't really of interest to us. And so the points of these is never to kind of tell off or kind of be strict in any sense, but just to kind of, again, try and provide inspiration or ideas if people are wanting to explore the impact of their project in that area. The final section is this machine learning scores, which is a slightly experimental approach, but was basically the only way that we could kind of comprehend providing some overall assessment for all 200 indicators. It became too much to try and combine them manually. And so we started this machine learning approach, which is trained with the projects that have used the platform. At the moment, the training is based on 9 projects, but it's just about to increase to 20, which is about to go through the retraining process again. And the training is basically based on a further series of interviews that we did with projects, where we had them self-assess their project in a number of ways. Firstly, ranking their impact in each of the domains as either high or low, and then there was a series of questions basically becoming more and more in depth in the assessment. And in doing so as well, we were then able, based on their responses, to kind of also calibrate the results between projects, so that if people were particularly self-critical or sort of optimistic about their impact, we were also able to make sure that the way that they were assessing themselves was kind of similar among all the projects. And yeah, we're kind of constantly adapting this and looking to retrain the algorithm regularly as new projects join the platform. As I say, it's a bit of an experimental approach at the moment, but we see it as another way to start interesting conversations about impact, and it's just another aspect of the platform for us. I mentioned also these resources and guidance on the about.mix.tools website, where we really tried to make everything available from the project. So for example, for every question in the platform, it's also listed on about.mix.tools. So if you want to view the questions without sort of signing in or creating a project, you can go to the sort of companion website, and there's every question with the answer options, also with the help and information text, and also with the source of the question and the original wording. As I mentioned, all of these came out of this literature review. So here you can kind of see where every question came from, and like how we've perhaps adapted it through the interviews and the workshops that we did to kind of arrive at the wording that we did. There's also, for every one of those rule-based indicators and recommendations, the definition of the indicator, the list of questions that are used within it, a kind of explanation of why we have chosen to use it, and then the kind of formula in terms of all of the answer options and their weights and the recommendations and the scores that they appear at. There's a how-to guide which kind of talks, hopefully the platform is fairly self-explanatory, but if you were to get stuck at any point, there is a how-to guide. And there's also this online guidance section which kind of talks through some of the impact assessment approaches that we used in the MICS project itself, which kind of goes beyond just the platform and also includes some of those impact indicators that came up from the literature review, kind of impact journey approach for co-evaluation, and also a kind of concept of impact stories as well. So there's a lot of resource and guidance on that website as well. And yeah, the aim was to be as kind of transparent as possible and share as much of it as possible. So this might be a section which is particularly relevant for citizen science hubs as well, where without having to create an account and create a project on the platform itself, which is kind of aimed at citizen science projects, you can still explore a lot of this material and the thinking behind it on the website about.mix.tools. So yeah, I said I'd reflect briefly on MICS for citizen science hubs at the end, which is something that during the project we didn't really have the time or capacity to consider. And I would say that that's kind of true in terms of most previous citizen science impact assessment is really focused on citizen science projects rather than citizen science hubs or that kind of institutional change, which is why I found it so interesting listening to the two previous presentations as well. I think it's a really interesting direction and a good sort of continuation of a lot of the principles of impact assessment that were kind of being carried out beforehand. So how can MICS be helpful in this kind of sense? It's a tool for citizen science projects to use, and citizen science hubs or institutions which are trying to support citizen science are almost certainly also connected with citizen science projects still. So in this sense, this is like a tool which that hub or organization can use for the citizen science projects that they're connected to. And in that sense as well, there's it gives a sort of framework to communicate and compare the impact of several of your projects, because it's in this standardized sort of set way that as I was saying, it could be a nice complement to some other monitoring and evaluation approaches that are often very specific to projects based on their objectives. This could maybe provide a sort of overview to combine for all of the projects that a hub might be involved with. And again, also those resources and templates on about.mix.tools, which could provide some interesting reading for citizen science hubs as well as for projects. Yeah, and I think this is really what I can see in terms of the relevance for MICS in these cases. I did try and think, we within the questions have quite a few questions on institutional change arising from the project, but it's kind of interestingly looking at things from the other direction. It's the impact of the project in potentially creating institutional change rather than the kind of impact of institutional change potentially on the projects that come about. But it could be interesting to see things from that different angle as well. But that's an overview of everything. As I say, even if the project ended, we're still very active in maintaining the platform and thinking about it. So if you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to get in touch with us. And we're very happy to answer questions or go through any of this if you have inquiries on things. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for presenting this. And it was very interesting, actually. And the platform seems very user-friendly. I don't know. I haven't used it myself, but from what you showed us, that was my perception. And well, now, if you have something that you want to ask to us, of course, this is the time to do it. If you want also to share any experience that you might have related to monitoring and evaluation or using the MICS platform or anything like that, just don't be shy. We are here to listen and to discuss. Anyone? Okay. So Maya Fedeli first.
Okay, so hi everyone, thank you for the presentation. They were really nice. So actually, I work in UNISR that Teresa showed us as one of the implementers of TIME4CS. So we're mainly an hospital and a university. So we hope that the citizen science project that will arise after all the work that we are doing with TIME4CS, they will be mainly focused on patients and pathologies and health issues. So I was wondering, my question is for Stefan, and if you think that MICS will help us also, our researchers, because in some way citizen science in the health topics are a little bit different from the classical citizen science project that mainly were done on naturalistic projects and observational, and obviously it's something that we are doing and we are implementing all of these. So I was wondering, because as I saw in your impact report, no, for example, the health project will not have any impact on the environment, maybe, but will have a very big impact on society. I think that will. Do you think that that the platform is ready for keeping this? Because I would like to advise this to our researcher very soon. So just to know if it's ready for this.
We'd hope so. I mean, we, as I was saying, we tried to be as comprehensive as possible in the questions that we created. So, for example, in the society domain, there are maybe 5 or more questions related to health-based projects as well. And for example, in the environment domain, we made sure that the first half of the environment domain should hopefully be approximately appropriate for every project, because it's based on the environmental impact of the project itself rather than the topic. So in theory, it should be okay. I mean, I think what you will find, and what every project finds, whether it's a kind of traditional citizen science or in a new area, is that the platform is good in terms of its breadth, but it's not very specific. So like it's not going to ask you 100 questions about like the health aspects of your project, but in terms of it will have a small part on health, and then it will have lots of parts on sort of other aspects of the project in terms of the experience of the participants, the kind of research outputs of the project, the potential institutional change kind of coming about from the project. So I would say, I hope it works. I would encourage you to use it. And if you have any questions or feedback as you're using it, the door is open. So there's a chance also to change this for future generations of health projects that it will, then when I get asked next time, I can say definitely.
Yeah, but as we said, we are implementers, so the researchers are not going to do that by themselves. I'm going to help them. So, and I know your name, so I'm going to find you if we need. We'll keep in touch. So thank you so much. And thank you also to the other presenters. It was an amazing seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can continue with Margarita, and then we have someone on the chat.
Good, thank you. It was so great to hear all these presentations. I have a question for Stephen. So at one point you mentioned that you assigned weights to the impact indicators. How did you do that? By which criteria?
So it's something that we did in a workshop within the project consortium. And I think it's important to recognize the difference in terms of what the weights are there to represent. It's not a very like fine-tuned system in which like a 21 or a 22 necessarily represents a huge difference, but one in which it's kind of just trying to give a sense of the magnitude of a project's impact in that area. And part of the kind of practicality on how the weights had to be assigned is also because those rule-based scores all have a corresponding recommendation. We had to kind of adjust the weights in such a way that the recommendations we gave, we could be fairly confident would be relevant for the projects based on the answers that they had given. So what we often did is to basically give a relatively high weight to certain answers so that we knew if they had scores above a certain threshold that they're definitely answered in a particular way to the questions, so that we could kind of create the corresponding recommendations. But so there was a lot of thought put into it, but it's not necessarily particularly precise in terms of why a weight is 6 and not 7 is, yeah, kind of not particularly significant. But as I said, all of the weights are kind of available on the about.mix.tools website as well. So there's hopefully there's some kind of sense of the logic that's been going for.
That's great. Thank you very much. And Geraldine O'Brien, if you want to introduce yourself, please do.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for allowing me to jump in. I just wanted to thank you very much for this morning, but also just to kind of explain to you why I'm here. I'm not potentially really understanding it myself yet, but I have done a lot of work in and around coming from collecting storytelling, and I'm in Dublin. So I've been working on my own in this for about 10, 11 years now. And I just see that there is an opportunity between people volunteering the information for citizen scientists, but not understanding how they can do it, basically. And so, you know, to do it in Ireland at the moment, there's an importance trying to get all our research bodies together under one network. And I see this, you know, happening all over the world. And I love the idea that there is a platform coming from your side, but I also think that there should be a platform like what you were talking about is citizen hubs. And I suppose that's really what I'm talking about. And seeing the connection, as you were saying, earlier in the project, I'm afraid it's coming up on my phone and it's very small, so I can't see everybody's name, excuse me. So I think that there's definitely opportunities there, and it's about, I'm coming from a citizen science point of view, and about societal change and understanding why this is necessary as we go forward. And like with social network or that sort of thing, it's kind of very dangerous to put up something without backups. So that's where I'm trying to find a safe way to kind of understand and help researchers to connect with citizen science. And I'm not sure if I'm there. I'm feeling around to see a way to do it. But the background coming up from where I'm coming from, I see there's a lot of interest in various people that want to have a societal input so that they can, that their views matter, and that they see how it could help. So I'm not sure if that is very clear to you, but that's where I'm coming from, and was very excited to be able to hear and see how your work is going. So thank you for having me. I'm not sure what you can say to me.
Thank you for being here.
No, so that was my joy. Thank you.
So yes, well, I think that what both Incentive and TIME4CS are trying to do is to actually create this fruitful environment for citizen science hub to flourish in universities and research performing organizations. So it is for us as well a work in progress, and it includes a lot of effort in order for the universities to take this direction and to create all the procedures to involve the citizens in more than like one-time participants, but rather than participants that actually find something meaningful to what they're doing and getting knowledge and impactful things about for themselves as well. So I think our citizen science hubs have more to actually say about that, because they have been interacting with a lot of people through the events that they have been organizing, and the 4 hubs that we have created are have many differences in their maturity level. So for example, in Lithuania and in Greece, they have started from very basic things, raising awareness about what citizen science is, and trying to attract more people and include them. And of course, in Barcelona and in Twente, they are more advanced, but still they are also trying to further institutionalize citizen science in their universities. And I think the most impactful until now, if I can say, are these events that they are interacting with their community, and of course the citizen science project that they are supporting, because people have been reaching out more and more, and this is very nice. And of course this is also the aim, the objective of what we are trying to do. And I see that Maya has raised her hand, so I think that you probably want to add some more, because Maya is our partner from the University of Twente, and is mainly the person responsible for the Citizen Science Hub there. And Maya, if you wanted to say something, please.
Yes, I think like in the final minutes of our meeting, thanks very much, Ellie. I can only support what you're saying here. So Geraldine, thank you very much also for addressing us And Ellie, I guess I can only support you. Indeed, here in the Netherlands, what we're doing is to actually, I guess, what is very important here, and also Sparky, Stephen, thanks very much also for introducing MICS to us. Very inspiring. I think what you see happening throughout Europe, and this is why these European projects also are so important, is that universities in particular, research performing organizations, they all want to embrace citizen science, but they don't really know how, because we are different, because we have those local contexts, because societies have different relationships also to science. But the fact that we are building like general frameworks that actually are working, like between all of the countries, and we set examples also, and then we show also locally and regionally and nationally how we're doing it. So we are setting these examples. I think that is what actually makes also like webinars like these also so important. We know that national policymakers really want us to do this, European policymakers also, but like the question really is how. So that's why we're trying to build this all up based also on everything that we already know also what is happening among us. So very, very good actually to see also society stepping in, knocking on the door like, hey, we would like you to make this happen. Well, we're trying hard, but it's quite, well, it's a challenge also. So we need a little, we need some time, and also then spread the words and make examples also matter. Thanks, Ellie, also for pointing it out. It was very clear.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if anyone has any last question.
I just wanted to say as well in response to this discussion, Geraldine, thank you very much for the question and for coming. I think it's very good. I don't know how familiar you are with citizen science in general, but as has kind of been pointed out in the discussion so far as well, we speak very much in this kind of European context, and these projects are European funded projects. And so as well as checking out the work of Incentive and Time4CS, which I think are both very interesting examples of kind of encouraging citizen science in sort of in an institutional sense, I think it could also be worth having a look at the European Citizen Science Association, and in particular, I'll put a web address in the chat as well for a website called EU Citizen Science, which is a repository of kind of resources and projects based around citizen science, but which contains within it also perhaps some resources and training aimed at like initial introductions to citizen science and kind of helping to introduce the topic for people who are less familiar to it and stuff as well. And the community there of European citizen science practitioners, people who've been working on this topic for years, so there are already a lot of good resources there. But as you can see, we're still having these discussions of the best way to do things as well. So if you continue to be interested in this area, hopefully you can join us in sort of figuring out how to do all of this as well and join in the discussion.
Thank you, Barty. And if I may, ask one last question. Teresa, if you can briefly tell us what your recommendation is about where the research performing organizations should start in order to evaluate their institutional support for citizen science.
Yes, well, this is really starting with trying to see what is already there. This stock taking is really a very important, interesting first step to go, and we will also share a template for that, to go really through these different points that we have identified with the work of several research performing organizations who really said, well, this helped to trigger citizen science, and this helped to trigger citizen science in our organization. So go through that and see, okay, what do we already have in our organization? What is there to build on? And this is a very good first step, and to also see, okay, and where areas where we can trigger first changes. What is the first thing we could do when we have identified our status quo? And I think this is really very helpful because very often you have your specific point, but not so much the point of the whole organization. And just going out and collecting this information and thinking about it and reaching out to others already helps to establish these first networks, also with other partners and other people in the organization, which is so helpful. And then you would realize, okay, there are first projects which might relate to citizen science, but just don't call them like that. And so also internally creating these networks via these first exercises is a very good first step, I think. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Actually, that's something that we have also realized while implementing incentive, that it's important to see where you start, and of course what you mentioned about projects that are actually citizen science projects, but they don't label themselves like that, and yeah, that's why we're here to spread the word about citizen science. Okay, so I think we can wrap it up. Thank you all very much. The discussion was really, really nice. And of course, thanks to our presenters for all these presentations. It's very weird to say that being a presenter myself as well, but thank you very much. And also to MICS Project that was here with us as a guest presenter. Okay. Thank you all, and have a nice day, of course, and see you in the next one. Because TIME4CS.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.